All right, nerds, in this video we're going to talk about the erection and ejaculatory response. So just real quick to make it a lot easier for you, because this is one of the ways that I always remember which system controls erection and which one controls ejaculation. When you're talking about the autonomic nervous system, the parasympathetic is actually going to be able to control the erection. You can remember that by parasympathetic point, okay? Sympathetic nervous system is going to control ejaculation. You can remember that by shoot. So parasympathetic point, sympathetic shoot. So we already know right off the bat that erections are caused by or controlled by your parasympathetic nervous system, and ejaculation is controlled by your sympathetic nervous system. All right, so let's go ahead and start off first with erection. What triggers an erection to occur? Now, the first stimulus for an erection is usually like the sight or the thought of certain types of erotic stimuli, or maybe the touch, like tactile stimuli, activation of like mechanoreceptors. So touching of the genitals or the skin, or touching of specific areas around the body that activate erotic sensations, right? So it could be the sight, it could be the thought. Some people, if it floats your boat, might even be the smell. Or it could be due to the tactile stimuli, due to the touching, right? And when it does that, what happens is it triggers some specific areas in your brain to activate the specific part of your spinal cord. So let's come over here. Let's say this is the part of the spinal cord, and let's say that this is the spinal cord region of S2, so sacral region S2 to S4, okay? Now in the sacral region of the spinal cord, you're going to have these parasympathetic neurons that are coming out. So let's say here I draw here in black, here's going to be my parasympathetic neurons. So they're coming out here, and this is going to be as the pelvic nerve, right? So it's going to be as the pelvic nerve. And what it's going to do is it's going to come to a specific area in the penis. So in the penis, before I show where it actually affects, in the penis you have, so let's say right here, here's the whole penis right here, right? Here's the shaft of the penis. This is the bulb of the penis. And this is the tip, which is consisting of the glans penis. This blue tissue in here is called the corpora cavernosa. So we call it the corpora cavernosum. I'm just going to call it the cavernosum. But it's basically erectile tissue. Now, what is erectile tissue? Erectile tissue is actually kind of like a spongy, meshy-like connective tissue that's riddled with a lot of vascular tissue. So in other words, what I mean, it's connective tissue with a lot of blood vessels supplying it. But it's more of like a spongy connective tissue. So again, we would say erectile tissue is a spongy connective tissue riddled with a lot of blood vessels. This outer one out here that's on both sides is the corpora cavernosa. There's another one that's just surrounding the actual urethra. You see this red one that I'm drawing here? It's literally surrounding the urethra, and specifically the penile, or spongy urethra, I should actually say. And what it's actually doing is it's helping to be able to keep the actual urethra open during ejaculation. Now, what's actually happening? This nerve, what is this nerve again called? This nerve is actually called the pelvic nerve. And it's actually coming from S2 to S4. So these nerves are coming out of sacral region 2 to 4. And it's coming in here and it's innervating specific blood vessels located within the corpora cavernosa. So there's a lot of blood vessels here in the corpora cavernosa that it's going to be innervating. So look, here's all these actual corpora cavernosa right there, right? It can innervate a little bit of the corpus spongiosum too, right? But the corpus spongiosum isn't going to fill up too much, because its main job is being able to keep the urethra open during ejaculation. So actually, let's zoom in here and let's see what these neurons are actually doing to the corpora cavernosa. Okay, so now we're zoomed in and we're actually looking at a blood vessel that's supplying the corpora cavernosa. So these blue bodies that you see here, this is the corpora cavern, this is basically the corpora cavernosum, right? So this is the erectile tissue. But the erectile tissue is a connective tissue with blood vessels like are riddling within them, right? So this is going to be a blood vessel. And here's the actual endothelial layer, and then this is going to be the smooth muscle layer. All right, so now let's follow this nerve. Let's say here was that nerve that we had, right? It was coming from the sacral region of the spinal cord. And what it actually can do is it can actually release specific chemicals. You see how this is this endothelial cell? What it does is it secretes a chemical called acetylcholine. Right? So these parasympathetic neurons release acetylcholine. What the acetylcholine does is it binds onto this receptor here. So it binds onto this receptor. And it triggers this intracellular pathway. And the overall result is that what happens is you're going to take an amino acid called arginine, and you're going to convert that. You're going to break off a piece of it. Actually, it breaks off into two pieces. what's going to happen is ACH is going to stimulate this receptor that's going to activate specific pathways that activate enzymes that are going to trigger this conversion. If you want to know it, it's actually called nitric oxide synthase enzyme. But arginine is acted on by nitric oxide synthase. What it does is it breaks arginine into two components. One is actually called citrulline, which isn't important here, and the other one is nitric oxide. This is really important, okay? So what has this neuron done so far? It's secreted acetylcholine, activated this endothelial cell to convert arginine to nitric oxide. Where does that nitric oxide go? It actually flows right into this smooth muscle cell. So in this smooth muscle cell, let's say we bring this nitric oxide in here. In this smooth muscle cell, we have a specific enzyme embedded into the cell membrane. So let's say here's this enzyme. This enzyme is called guanylyl cyclase. Okay, guanylyl cyclase. This nitric oxide is going to act on this guanylyl cyclase. It's going to stimulate the guanylyl cyclase. When it stimulates the guanylyl cyclase converts GTP into cyclic GMP. And what that cyclic GMP will do is it'll actually go and actually help to activate other different types of enzymes. Enzymes that are basically going to cause the actual smooth muscle cell to relax. So it's actually what it's going to do is it's going to activate specific channels maybe that'll cause like potassium ions to maybe leave the cell, right? And then what's the overall result? If the cell actually is losing potassium ions, it's actually going to hyperpolarize, right? And it's going to lead to this vasodilation response, right? So the smooth muscle cell will actually relax. When a smooth muscle cell relaxes, what happens to this blood vessel? It starts dilating and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then what happens to the erectile tissue is it starts expanding. So this erectile tissue starts expanding and expanding and expanding. There's veins over here, little veins that actually drain the actual blood from this corpora cavernosa. It drains it. But if you think about it, let's say here's the vein. As we start dilating this blood vessel and dilating and dilating and dilating and expanding the corpora cavernosa starts pinching those veins, squeezing those veins. And now the blood can't drain out. So the blood that's supposed to be draining out of here is actually being inhibited. And so if the blood can't be drained, what's going to happen? The actual penis is going to get engorged with blood. And that's going to trigger the erection. Okay, so again, what triggered the erection? Parasympathetic neurons within the sacral region of the spinal cord are activated by the different types of erotic or tactile stimuli, or the sight or the smell, or even the thought of different types of erotic stimuli. And then that nerve is going to go release acetylcholine on the endothelial cells in those blood vessels and actually activate enzymes that are going to convert arginine into nitric oxide. Nitric oxide will go into the smooth muscle cells nearby, activate guanylyl cyclase, who converts GTP into cyclic GMP, and the overall result from that is it might cause potassium ions to leave and cause the smooth muscle cell to relax, and that causes vasodilation. The corpora cavernosa and this whole erectile tissue starts expanding, squeezes and pinches off the drainage veins, which prevents blood from leaving and maintains the engorgement of the penis with blood, and that's the erection. Now, obviously some people who can't get it up have a hard time with this vasodilation response. So you know what they give you? They give you Viagra. And when they give you Viagra, specifically what the Viagra is doing is there's an enzyme. There's an enzyme that actually degrades this cyclic GMP. Let's show you that enzyme here. Let's say here's the enzyme. And this enzyme is degrading the cyclic GMP. It's eating it up, right? What is the name of this enzyme? This enzyme is called phosphodiesterase, and it's actually type 5, PDE5. What Viagra does is it comes over here and inhibits the phosphodiesterase. So then what happens? Your cyclic GMP levels remain high so that you continue to push potassium ions out and cause the actual smooth muscle cell to relax and cause vasodilation. So for those of you who can't get that sucker up, you give them Viagra, it'll inhibit the phosphodiesterase type 5, which will keep the cyclic GMP levels up, which will keep the actual smooth muscle cells relaxing and dilating. All right, so now we have undergone the erection response. So now this area is filled with blood. So it's engorged with blood now. Now, what triggers this ejaculation response? Everyone has a threshold, right? So whenever a person, an individual has these reflexes, because this is what it is, it's just a reflex. This tactile stimuli is triggering the parasympathetic nervous system, who's causing this erection. Whenever the person is actually getting a large influx, a large flow of parasympathetic flow to that actual erection, right? Causing the erection. Whenever there's a large outgo to the actual, from the parasympathetic nervous system, eventually the cerebral cortex stops this from happening. So let's say here's the cerebral cortex. Let's say I just draw like a chunk, and let's say this is the cerebral cortex. So here's your cerebral cortex. What happens is the cerebral cortex will send down these descending fibers that will inhibit the parasympathetic nervous system. But then what it's going to do is it's going to say, okay, this guy's had enough fun for today. I'm going to inhibit the parasympathetic nervous system and stimulate the sympathetic nervous system. And what's really triggering this? It's whenever the person has so much parasympathetic outflow going to cause the erection that eventually the central nervous system says, okay, we've reached high threshold. Let's inhibit parasympathetic and now stimulate sympathetic. And what does sympathetic cause? Shoot, remember that? Ejaculation. How does it do it? Okay, we go back to the spinal cord, but now the spinal cord's in a different part. It's at a different level. This is at the level of about T12 to about L2, okay? So about T12 to L2 is this level. What happens here now? These actual neurons, so it stimulates, what happens is these descending fibers stimulate the actual cell bodies in the lateral gray horn of the spinal cord, right? And then it comes out here and it synapses on a ganglia. This ganglia that it actually synapses on is called the inferior mesenteric ganglion. And then what happens here? This inferior mesenteric ganglion has cell bodies of the postganglionic motor neurons. And where do these guys go? They go all over the frickin' place. Look what happens with this guy. One of them's going to come over here. One of them's going to come over here. Another one's going to come over here. Another one's going to come over here. And let's actually have one more over here. I'm going to kind of loop this puppy around here, and it's going to stimulate this guy. Okay. A lot of different axons here. What are all of these guys doing? Okay, so you've reached the point, the peak point, right, of the erection. Now the sympathetic nervous system comes into play. Well, you got to remember, where was sperm being made? It was being made in the testes, right? So this is the testes, where the seminiferous tubules are. This black C-shaped structure right here is called the epididymis, and that's where it's being stored and maturing, right? It's being stored here, and then whenever the individual is getting ready to ejaculate, this sympathetic, this adrenergic fibers release what chemical? Norepinephrine, right? So it's going to release norepinephrine. What's norepinephrine going to do? It's going to stimulate these adrenergic receptors on the smooth muscle cells and cause it to contract. So what's going to happen here? It's going to undergo contraction. And if this undergoes contraction, what is it going to start doing? It's going to start squeezing the sperm out of the epididymis and into this long tube here. What's this long tube here called? This is called the vas deferens. So again, what was this structure here called? The epididymis. And again, it was this whole C-shaped structure here. Then when it actually contracts, it pushes it into this structure here, which is called the vas deferens. But now, there's receptors on the actual vas deferens smooth muscle. And where is that going to be at? So it's going to be contracting, continuously squeezing it up. This is actually the inguinal canal that it moves through. So look, right there, this is the vas deferens. What is it going to be doing? Secreting what chemical? Norepinephrine. What's norepinephrine going to be doing? Binding onto that receptor. Causing what? Causing contraction. Continuously moving the sperm now. Then, the sperm meets another structure. You see this blue gland right here? This blue gland is called the seminal vesicles. So it's called the seminal vesicles. And again, what was this long tube here called? This long tube is called the vas deferens. The vas deferens has this little dilated region called the ampulla that joins with a little duct coming off of the seminal vesicles. Now the seminal vesicles actually make what's called, they make semen. They make a lot of different chemicals that we'll talk about in the fertilization video. But basically they're producing this different types of chemicals that are going to help to make up semen, right? How do we get that semen out? Well, this nerve right here, coming from the inferior mesenteric ganglion, right? This is actually going to secrete what chemical? Norepinephrine. What's norepinephrine going to do? It's going to act on that adrenergic receptor and cause the actual smooth muscle to contract. What's it going to do? It's going to expel the actual semen out of the seminal vesicles and into this whole little tube here that we have coming here, which is the combination of the vas deferens and the seminal vesicle duct. What's this long tube that's running here? This little tube is called the common ejaculatory duct. And what forms it again? It's the vas deferens and a duct of the seminal vesicles fuse. Vas deferens is contracting and moving the sperm along. Seminal vesicles contracts and pushes the semen, and now you have the seminal fluid that it actually makes. So seminal vesicles are actually making seminal fluid, but when you combine seminal fluid with sperm, you actually get semen. So that's what semen is. So let's actually write that down. So semen is actually going to be sperm and seminal fluid. And we'll talk about the components of the seminal fluid for the seminal vesicles and fertilization. Now it's moving through this common ejaculatory duct, and then it moves through this little donut-shaped gland. You see this little donut-shaped gland right there? It's called the prostate, right? And then there's a little tube right here that the actual prostate gland has, the urethra here. It's called the prostatic urethra. What happens is it's going to squeeze and push that actual semen into the prostatic urethra. What else helps to assist this process? Now, there shouldn't actually be receptors here on the bladder. There should only be receptors here for this smooth muscle right here. So you know the bladder is actually having an epithelium of transitional, but then outside of that it has a nice smooth muscle layer called the detrusor. There's a little kind of continuation of that smooth muscle here, right around this point here called this actual urethra, right? So it's getting ready to empty the bladder and go into the urethra. There's this little smooth muscle area that's consisting of what's called the internal urethrosphincter. What happens is this releases norepinephrine. And what norepinephrine does is it binds onto that receptor of the internal urethrosphincter and it causes it to constrict. Why? You don't want frickin' semen going up into your bladder. You want to have just urine in there. So what it does is it causes this internal urethrosphincter to contract. And if it contracts, it actually squeezes this part here and then prevents the actual reflux of the semen up into the bladder. So far, it's caused contraction of the epididymis, contraction of the vas deferens, contracting of the seminal vesicles to push the seminal fluid in here. It's squeezed the common ejaculatory duct, squeezed that sperm out into the prostatic urethra, and it's preventing the reflux of the semen into the actual bladder by contracting the internal urethrosphincter. Now, one more thing. Once we've gotten to this point now, we're getting ready to reach the climax. There's one more thing that happens. Out of the sacral region of the spinal cord also, you're going to have these actual cell bodies in the actual anterior great horn. And look what's going to happen. It's going to come out here, it's going to move, and it's going to innervate this guy right there. So it's going to come in and it's going to innervate right there. What is this nerve right here? This is the somatic nervous system. This right here is actually the somatic nerve. So it's like the pudendal nerve, right? So it's the pudendal nerve. It's going to come, once you've actually getting ready to ejaculate, it's going to release specific types of chemicals. What chemical? It's going to release acetylcholine, right? Because this muscle right here that you're going to see around the bulb of the penis, this muscle right there is called the bulbospongiosus. Bulbospongiosus. The somatic nerve is going to release acetylcholine. And guess what it's going to do to this actual bulbospongiosis? Cause it to contract. When it starts contracting, where's the sperm at? We said the sperm were right here, right? They were actually in the prostatic urethra. Well, then what's going to happen is we got to get this sperm out. So this bulbospongiosis is contracting. And when it's contracting, it's helping to propel the sperm through the actual urethra and out, blasting those puppies out of about 11 miles an hour. Okay, so those suckers are flying. All right, so bulbospongiosis is contracting. Who's causing that? The somatic pudendal nerve, right? It's coming over here, innervating this actual bulbospongiosis, releasing acetylcholine, causing the influx of sodium ions, contracting, and helping to expel the sperm out. Once the sperm is expelled, that is the ejaculation. and that is the climactic point. So whenever they actually ejaculate, they've reached the climactic point, right? The peak point in their orgasm. Once that happens, once they've actually had the orgasm, you know how the parasympathetic nervous system was actually causing that innervation of the blood vessels and stuff like that? Well, this ejaculatory response is just so fast. Once the ejaculation is actually ended, those blood vessels that were actually, if we actually come back here, these blood vessels that were dilating, right after ejaculation is occurring, they actually start going back to their normal size because they have no parasympathetic innervation. As they start going back to their normal size, it's actually going to start causing the corpora cavernosa, right, the erectile tissue, to start decreasing in size. As it starts decreasing in size, what starts happening to these drainage veins? They open. If they open, what starts happening? Blood starts flowing out. What happens? The little PP goes flaccid then, okay? So then this is actually going to cause the actual, the limpness of the penis, right? So it's going to cause it to become flaccid. And again, to wrap everything up here, erection is triggered by a parasympathetic reflex. How can you remember that? Parasympathetic, point. Ejaculation is triggered by a sympathetic reflex, which is going to be ejaculation. You can remember sympathetic, shoot. What part of the spinal cord is the sympathetic coming out? T12 to L2. And it's coming out to the inferior mesenteric ganglion and all these nerves that you actually see here. It's actually a bundle of them. It's a plexus. It's actually called the hypogastric plexus, just in case you want to know that. And then what part of the spinal cord is coming for parasympathetic? S2 to S4. What is it doing? It's innervating the actual corpora cavernosa, right? The blood vessels, causing them to dilate, causing the engorgement of the penis. Then whenever that erotic stimuli has reached a maximum point, it activates the sympathetic nervous system and inhibits the parasympathetic nervous system. This reflex is so fast. What happens? The sympathetic nervous system causes contraction of the epididymis, contraction of the vas deferens, contraction of the seminal vesicles to expel the seminal fluid. The sperm is actually going to combine with the seminal fluid and make semen, get put into the common ejaculatory duct, and then what happens? The somatic nervous system and the pudendal nerve coming from the ventral gray horn is going to come over, innervate the bulbospongiosus, which is a skeletal muscle, as well as the ischiocavernosus and the superficial transverse peroneus, and cause those muscles to start contracting. They're going to help, the bulbospongiosus is going to be one of the main ones that's going to help to be able to propel the sperm out. But they also help to be able to provide a lot of pleasure, okay? Then once you've reached the orgasmic point, sympathetic nervous system turns off, parasympathetic nervous system has actually already been inhibited, the blood vessels start actually going back to normal size, corpora cavernosa starts shrinking, drainage veins open, blood starts actually draining from the actual erectile tissue and the penis and causes it to return to its flaccid point. And then you reach the latent period. All right, Ninja Nerds, I hope all of this made sense. I hope it helped, guys. All right, until next time.